Hello, everybody. Welcome to another installment of Rebel Without Applause, coming to you as I always do from my TSA, and that is my television studio apartment. It does double duty as a television studio and a studio apartment, and as always, I'm coming to you from the Wood of the Holly, under the sign overlooking the post-apocalyptic COVID-19 addled land of law, and I'm here today with a very special guest. He's a friend, and he's a doctor, and he's here today to share with us everything he knows. He is Dr. David Schechter. He is truly a modern Maimonides, and he's here with me now. Welcome, Doc. How are you feeling?
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. It's great to be here.
Good, and it's great to have you. We had a little delay there. You weren't feeling well, and you got through your little passage, and fortunately, it was not the virus. I'm happy to hear that.
Well, I'm happy too, although at some level, if you get through a mild case, then you're probably immune. So,
right. That's what I hear, but it's not clinical. We're not sure about that. Is that correct?
We're not 100% sure how long immunity lasts or whether mild cases cause immunity. This is something that is being studied. Mm-hmm. But if we compare it to other coronaviruses, there were milder coronaviruses that have been around the environment in the United States for about the last 10 or 15 years, causing colds and occasionally pneumonia. With those infections, typically you get 1, 2, or 3 years of immunity from getting sick from one of them.
And do you have enough testing kits available for you to know if you indeed have the antibodies?
The antibody test kits are still being perfected, although they're being used in Germany extensively, and they're being used in research in the United States. The labs that I work with, which are really good quality labs, still don't offer them for the general patient population or public. Hopefully soon, but I've been saying that for the last couple of weeks. Hopefully soon.
So there's actually two kind of tests that people there's a test to see if you're indeed infectious or if you have it, and then there's a separate test that tells you if you had it or if you have the antibodies that show you survived it and got through it. Is that correct?
That's right. The coronavirus test is either administered by a physician or nurse or can be in some cases self-administered. It's typically a swab that one inserts in the nose, and the patient would insert it themselves, maybe halfway back or a little farther. The doctor can insert it in the nose, and it actually goes all the way to the throat, where you twirl it a little bit, bring it back out, and you get a nice little sample there. In some settings, they're doing throat swabbing instead of nasal swabbing. This is then tested by a DNA RNA-based test to see if the virus is present in your nose or your throat if they test that. So that tells you, is there virus present? And that's an active infection with coronavirus. The other one we started to talk about falls into the category of serology or antibody. That's the immune response that the body develops in response to an infection. Mm-hmm. And to make that even more complicated, there's two types of immunity. There's IgM and IgG. IgM is the immediate antibody that you develop while you're still sick with the infection. Toward the end of the infection, it goes up, and then it persists a few months. And then IgG begins perhaps 4 to 6 weeks after your infection and then builds up further and hopefully lasts for years as an immunity. So some of these test kits that they're working on and using to some degree for research now will test both IgM, meaning have you had a recent infection, and IgG, which is you're developing longer-term immunity to it.
And those two indicators can be probably combined into one test? Is that basically what you're saying?
Yes. It would either be a finger stick or it would be a blood test from your arm. And it would be one test that could tell you IgM and IgG.
Now, is that something that you'd have to submit to a lab, or it could reveal a color like a pregnancy test and you could know within timely fashion, something you might be able to pick up at a CVS and, I got to do a test for that. Is that a possibility, do you think, down the road?
The government doesn't feel at this point that's a good idea to release it to the public for self-testing because of the potential inaccuracy of some kits and because of the need to understand what the results mean. Mm-hmm. At this point, there's going to be two types of tests. They're going to be a kit that you could do in a doctor's office in 15 minutes with a finger stick. You put the blood on it, and then the patient waits 15 minutes, and you have a result. And it's kind of like a pregnancy test type kit.
Right.
And the other type of test would be a blood draw that a tube of blood is sent to a lab, and it's analyzed over the course of a day or two, run through a machine, and then you get a more detailed report, including quantitative levels, meaning numerical levels of how much antibody you have, which could be useful information. Some of your audience may be familiar with that kind of kit or that type of test because it's been used for herpes for many years. It tells you if you've been exposed to and have antibodies to herpes 1 or herpes 2. And it can also be used for other exposures like measles and rubella and things like that to see if you're immune.
Right. So this is a family of viruses that we're already familiar with, these coronaviruses. We've seen them. This is a unique strain of it. So the question that I have is, are we like 3/4 of the way up the mountain to, let's say, a vaccine or some treatment based on all the prior knowledge that we have about this family of viruses? Or are we starting from zero?
That's an excellent question. This is, as you said, a novel coronavirus, but we do have research familiarity with other coronaviruses. And there have even been some companies that have worked on vaccines for coronaviruses, including SARS and MERS, which were coronaviruses that hit over the last 10 or 15 years. But fortunately, a relatively smaller number of people were involved.
Right.
We're not up the crest of the mountain in terms of research and vaccines and things like that, but we're not starting from zero either.
Okay.
So that gives us an advantage. Some scientists have said that more knowledge has been gained about this virus in 6 weeks than was gained in the first 6 years of the HIV/AIDS virus. So that's an impressive level of speed and of knowledge that's been gained, but at this point, it's not yet actionable in terms of treatment or in terms of vaccines.
And what's the time frame between somebody in the lab, they get this thing, we have a vaccine, we're confident, we've tested it, and getting it out in mass quantities to a public?
It's always a pretty big ramp up, and it has to be tested both for safety and then for efficacy or how effective it is. Mm-hmm. But we're looking at 12 to 18 months, best case scenario, unless something really revolutionary happens to make it faster than that. Many viruses, including horrible ones like polio and less serious ones like chickenpox and measles and rubella, do have vaccines that are effective. Hepatitis A has a vaccine. Hepatitis B has a vaccine. I will remind you that HIV never got a vaccine.
That's
got
correct.
Effective treatment, but it never got a vaccine. So we're hoping 12 to 18 months that we'll have an effective and safe vaccine that could be produced for mass number of individuals. We're talking literally 1 billion samples of this have to be provided, if not more. And so it's quite a process. You know, Bill Gates has offered to both his expertise and his team's expertise from Africa and also money to expedite vaccine development. And there's probably 10 companies around the world, at least 4 in America, a couple in Europe, 1 in Israel, that are all working on a vaccine. So hopefully one of these will come to fruition quickly.
When they test a vaccine, it's an interesting thing because it's like trying to test something in the absence of. You take it and you didn't get it. So it's almost like you're trying to prove a negative. How do they test for a vaccine?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Stage 1 is just giving it to healthy volunteers and making sure they don't get a reaction. They don't get sick from it.
Okay.
So that's to determine that it's safe. Stage 2 is take 1,000 people who aren't infected and aren't immune to coronavirus and give 500 the vaccine and give 500 a placebo and see over the course of months how many of them get coronavirus. You know, if 0% of the people in the vaccine group get coronavirus and 20% of the people in the other group get coronavirus, then you know that the vaccine is extremely effective. If it's only if maybe 10 people get it in one group and 50 people get it in another group, it's effective, but it's not 100% effective. So that's how they test it. And that's why it takes a while, because you don't want to produce 1 billion vaccines only to find out that it's only minimally effective. You want it to be highly effective. And as you said, it's too dangerous a disease to expose people to this intentionally for research purposes. And so it has to be living in the world and getting a vaccine versus getting a non-vaccine, a placebo shot, and then using all the usual precautions, washing your hands, keeping your distance. And even with that, certain number of people are going to get sick or at least get exposed to the virus. Maybe they don't even get sick. Maybe they just get immune. Maybe followed over the course of 3 months and then 6 months, and you'd be hoping to get results. And it could be that 5 or 6 vaccines will be tested simultaneously in this fashion, and that one of them will prove to be the winner. And what Bill Gates was saying is maybe we should ramp up and produce 1 billion copies of all 7 versions of the vaccine, and then whatever one works we'll keep, and the other 6 will just destroy. So that's a novel way to do it, but
it's a game of
expensive way to
statistics
do
and
it.
probability. Then ultimately, it's the study of statistics that lead us to the truth, I guess, or what's
Yeah.
effective and what's not. I guess alternatively, we could give the whatever this tested vaccine and let them go to like a New Jersey Laker game at the Forum or at the Coliseum, at the Staples Center, and see how many people get it. And but yeah, that would not be safe. So
It'd be hard to sign people up for that duty.
yeah, but the free tickets, come on, yeah.
Maybe courtside. I don't think for regular tickets they do it.
Yeah, that's true. It's funny as I think about this, it's not funny, but to me, as I look at, all this lockdown measures that we're doing, so much of our prevention comes down to really just, I'm going to use a sports metaphor, but blocking and tackling, like separate. I mean, it's, and gloves and masks and protective wear. Those are just the fundamentals of not only COVID-19, but of all infectious situations. And it seems like that's how we protect our healthcare system. That's how we knock this thing back, give it a punch in the nose. From what I can see, viruses have one purpose only, and that's to replicate. And when they don't have the opportunities, where do they go?
They sort of go dormant or disappear. It really takes you back to 100 years ago because we have no natural immunity to the COVID-19 coronavirus.
Mm-hmm.
We have no natural immunity in the population. You have to go back to measures that were developed 100 years ago, which are not high-tech measures, as you said. They're wearing gloves or wearing a mask or staying away from other people, washing your hands. I mean, they're very low-tech measures, but they're very effective when implemented in the whole population. If people follow them, the number of infections starts to drop off pretty rapidly. And that's what we're left with at this point until we start talking about a concept called herd immunity.
Right.
Familiar with that term?
Of course, yes. We got to get to that point, and that you probably need a vaccine and people with antibodies to get to that number.
Right. So you either get a vaccine and everybody gets vaccinated, and that's how you get herd immunity, or people are gradually released to go back to work, to go back to stores, to go back to living, and a certain number of those people get infected. And hopefully it's not such a large number that the healthcare system is overwhelmed as it was in Italy and briefly in New York. And then more and more people develop antibodies that we talked about. And eventually you get to a point where a significant percentage of the herd of the population of humans is immune, so that if one case comes in on an airplane from Argentina, that person can't infect 5 other people because those 5 other people are immune. And so the virus just dies in that patient when the patient recovers from the illness and develops his own antibodies, which is what happens to 96% or more of the confirmed cases, is that people survive it and develop antibodies, we believe. And it might be 99% or more of all infected people, because the numbers you're seeing on cable TV is about confirmed cases, meaning cases that have been tested with that nasal swab or that throat swab. Usually they've been in a doctor's office or in a hospital. It's not the thousands or millions more who may have been infected in a milder level or never got to a test. And so the numbers are starting to look like a lot of people are dying, and a lot of people are dying, but it's still a low percentage of all those people who are infected. So if you get the thing, you've got a very good chance of surviving.
Right. Now,
really at any age.
Just for me personally, you might know this because I've been into your office. Full disclosure, I'm also a patient and a happy one. When I get a cough or a bronchial thing, very often, or a sore throat, it's followed by a cough that beats the hell out of me. It's like an overreaction in my immune system to something that's really pretty minor. I'll go in, they go, well, you don't even have an infection. I go, I know, but I'm coughing like crazy. And they say, well, your immune system's like overreacting to this and it's beating you up. So honestly, this thing scares me personally because I feel like that could be devastating, in terms of...
No, I hear what you're saying. I mean, there's no direct evidence of the fact that you get typically a chesty cough with a cold, that means you're going to have a worse coronavirus case. Mm-hmm. I know enough about you to know that you're a pretty darn good swimmer, including an ocean swimmer.
Yes. And
you can make an argument that would make your lungs stronger than the average person and more able to withstand an infection or a COVID lung issue. But again, we really don't know. This is something that's being researched. Why do some people, including healthy 40 and 50-year-olds, occasionally get horrific cases of this? And other people in their 90s survive it. We don't really know that. We don't have a complete understanding of why it targets some people more horrendously than others.
Well, it's sort of the mysteries of evolution. I remember seeing and reading about how certain people escaped the Black Plague unscathed, and they had certain kind of genetic immunities that they had no idea about, and while their neighbors expired. So I guess it's just all part of this. The viruses and the bacteria are evolving, and humans are, and we're constantly being tested. And there's this friction between viruses and human health, and it's been going on since humans have been alive, or in all organisms, I guess. It's just...
Yeah. I mean, it probably went on with the dinosaurs. There was probably viruses that attacked the dinosaurs at different points. And there's an adaptation, as you said. The creature adapts and the virus adapts. And really, viruses, as you said, just want to replicate. They just exist to replicate, to make more of themselves. If they kill the host, they're a less effective replicator than if they make the host sick and make the host sneeze and cough and spit and that kind of stuff. So a lot of times viruses will mutate to a milder form over time where people get sick but don't die.
Right.
We certainly hope that occurs tonight with COVID-19, but if not tonight, then relatively soon, that it becomes more like the common cold, which we've all dealt with since we were kids.
So to me, the virus is really at its most devious is when you're asymptomatic. Because then, hey, you're going to the restaurant, then we went to the club, and I went to the Laker game, and I went to a party at my friend's house, and the virus it's like making hay. That's its big days when humans are dumb and asymptomatic. And when a person gets sick, what do? They go to bed. They're tired. They lay down. They're in a relative quarantine anyway because they're sick. So to me, like, the strategy of a virus is that period of time when the person's asymptomatic. That's when it can do its dirtiest work.
No, you're right. You're right. That's a tricky time because you don't know you have it, and yet you could give it to other people. And this is such a simple structure. We call it, I don't even know if you want to call it an organism because it's so much different than bacteria
right.
and animal and plant cells, but it's a very simple structure. RNA as a form of, genetic material. It's like DNA. It's RNA. It's wrapped in a protein code. It's got these spikes on the surface to attach to a cell. And it's a very simple structure, yet it's extremely effective. And look, we even use the term viruses for computers because we realize that this type of code, so to speak, the RNA code or the computer code, can be very simple but do a lot of damage.
I've been trying to go viral on social media forever, and I can barely get beyond my friends. I don't know. It's a nightmare. It's the secret to my obscurity is I can't go viral. So, yeah. Well, I kind of envision, I always think of, what is a good metaphor for a virus? It's almost like a piece of Lego that wants to stick on cells. It's not a cell itself. It needs a host, or like a broke girlfriend. It needs a host to stay with, and then it can move on afterwards. So
that's a good analogy, and I'm sure people come up with even better ones. It definitely needs a host.
So now I want to just share with us. You wrote a terrific book, and I read it some time ago. It's called Think Away Your Pain. Talk to me a little bit about that, and maybe there's a way to circle back into that philosophy, that medical discipline that you've embraced here in Los Angeles, and how it might be effective for what we're dealing with in the COVID-19 era.
That's a good question. Think Away Your Pain is a book that details and summarizes an approach to chronic pain that persists without a clear explanation, that really is more in the nervous system. It's pain that's stuck in your nervous system. It's related to your stress, your emotions, even to traumas you had years before. And there's a method by which we help you to get rid of that chronic pain that doesn't involve medications or surgery. So that's the overall approach. Dr. Sarno brought it to me, and I've built upon it, as have others. And I've written the Mind Body Workbook and Think Away Your Pain to help people with that. As I'm dealing now with a lot of people in lockdown mode, a lot of patients that I'm dealing with telemedicine now. I'm talking to them on the phone and via audio video chat rather than face-to-face in the office. I'm realizing that we've got to find ways to cope with this incredibly constrained lifestyle we now have. We're used to going out and doing things and sitting in restaurants, and obviously a lot of people aren't going to work, all of that stuff. And now we're at home. So what do you have to do? You have to really find ways to manage your stress. So I'll give you a bunch of ideas. I'm curious to hear some of your own ideas. I think for most people who are not used to being at home a lot, there obviously are people who work at home ordinarily, and it's not that much of a difference for them. But for people who are not used to being at home this much, I think it's important that you develop a little bit of a schedule for the day. So I don't recommend, for example, getting up and staying in a robe the whole day. It might work for some people, but for most people, it's a good idea to get up. If you used to shower in the morning, shower in the morning. If you used to get up and put clothes on, do that. It doesn't have to be dress clothes. Just put something on, start the day. And then try to think of something you can do that's meaningful to you. That might be meditation, might be prayer, might be reading some poems. Start the day off instead of with the media, which is so negative. Start off with something that fills you up a little bit inside. It gives you some positive feeling. I've mentioned a few examples. And then, they talk about social distancing, but I talk about media distancing. Don't spend a lot of time with the media. It's very, it drags you down. It makes you more sick. It makes you more worried. Try to find a few.
I have pulled the MSNBC and Fox News IV out of my forearm, just so you know. It's out.
So, find a few reliable sources of information, whether it be the Center for Disease Control or Johns Hopkins University, or, I'm sending my patients a weekly newsletter on updates. So find a few reliable sources of information, and that should be enough for you. And then find other things to do. I mean, this is a chance where some people have more time in their hands than they're used to, and maybe it's a chance to write an article, or to write your memoirs, or to organize your photos, things you've been wanting to do for years you haven't had time to do. Try to do something. Then I also believe it's important you get exercise every day during this lockdown time. So for most people, that's a brisk walk or a jog outside. Other people might have, an elliptical or other equipment. I also think it's important to get outside every day, so you can combine that with the exercise, of course. I think you have to see the sky, you have to see the trees, you have to see some type of nature, a squirrel, whatever it is that's out there. Get outside every day. Find some things, and maybe for your evening, try to find some lighter entertainment. There's plenty of things you can stream that aren't apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic, or
don't watch reruns of Soylent Green. Like I'm done with that.
Horror movies. Try to stay away from that kind of stuff. And I'm also finding that Zoom and the FaceTime and all of that, it can make a very effective way to connect with people or reconnect with people. So, call somebody up or set up a time to have a half hour or an hour Zoom conversation. Or if you're a couple, you can set up a little couples coffee date. If you're single, maybe it's a chance to get to know somebody in a more remote way, but maybe in a more effective way that we sometimes do with our modern dating practices. So try to do something that's going to keep your day busy. You're not going to mope. You're not going to be spending the whole time with the media. You're going to try to get something done. You're going to look at this as kind of a little bit of a gift to you to be home rather than like a jail cell.
Right.
And remember, even people in jail, sometimes they learn a foreign language, or they get a bachelor's degree, or they accomplish a lot during jail time. And you're not even in jail. You're just isolating in order to keep yourself safe and to keep the vulnerable safe.
Well, I'll tell you what,
I hope those are a few ideas. Yeah.
What I'm doing is I play jazz, so I'm a clarinetist too, among other things. So I've now settled into a routine where I give a jazz concert on Facebook Live, like every night at 7:30 for an hour. I play like 6-7 tunes. I rap. I get 10, 15, 20, sometimes more listeners. Then I share the video, and a couple hundred people end up seeing it. So literally, they had to cancel all the gigs on earth, the comedy clubs, the jazz clubs, for me to find my gig, which is right here in front of my phone with Facebook Live. And I have my tracks, and I play jazz tunes. And it's...
Well, Bill, you have to let us know the link, because I'm curious to listen to it tonight at 7:30, and I think other people, Pacific time, and I think other people will be too.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, because you're expressing yourself and you're also giving to others. And, this is an opportunity during this pandemic to think more about other people. I mean, maybe there's a senior citizen in your neighborhood that that you can buy groceries for and leave them at the front door. You're not really going in their house, of course, for safety reasons. Maybe there's somebody in their 70s or 80s you can help out, And, there's a chance to give back and to get that good feeling and connection that way, even if you can't be in the room with someone, even if you can't shake their hand. They'll be very appreciative, and I'm sure they'll leave you the appropriate cash or they'll Venmo you the money or whatever.
I've been thinking about that.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, I used to drive for Uber, and I've stopped because I am not going to be in an enclosed tin can with people I don't know. I feel like that's a recipe for trouble. But they do have Uber Eats, and people are ordering and delivering. And I'm thinking maybe in the near than later future, I might start doing that again, where it's just basically picking up and dropping off.
It's a public service. You have to look at it as a public service. I mean, there's a lot of people we didn't appreciate who we appreciate now. The people trucking food from the farm to the Whole Foods in your area or the Ralph. I mean, these people are heroes. I mean,
Yes.
If they get sick, we don't get food, and we're more conscious of that now than we used to be. So you'd be heroically helping people out by delivering takeout food to their houses, make a few bucks doing it, and it's a good thing for everybody.
Yeah, so that's on my horizon. I see this. I see this releasing itself in stages. Not okay. Hey, it's party time. The bell goes off. We can all go back to the playground. I don't see that happening. I see this moderating its way back. And the first big thing for me was, okay, how do I live without sports? We were coming up on a Laker playoff season that a lot of people I know were really excited about. The Dodgers look pretty good. And it's like, okay, that's gone, dude. Like, there's a big gap in my life. I have to learn to fill it. And it was occupied by sports. I have to admit, life without sports.
Well, how are you filling it, Bill?
I'm doing what I can. I mean, I'm lonely. It's a challenge. This thing can bring people together. It also can stress them into like PTSD situations that make some people's reactions a little bit out of proportion to their circumstance because of, I wonder about people like my friend's mother. She's in her 90s. She is a survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto. So she was locked down as a young girl, and fortunately her father was actually a well-known composer, and they were able to get out. But to be sure, she was traumatized and locked down in that ghetto as a young girl. And now, guess what? She's locked down again. And my friend has said, my mom's completely irrational, and she's freaking out, and she can barely complete a sentence. And I said, well, I don't know. I'm not a psych. But this sounds to me like this could be triggering very old and deep traumas in her memory.
Well, you're very right that people's prior experiences is definitely going to affect their reaction to this confinement period. And for example, people who tend toward anxiety or anxiety disorders might be doing worse. Mm-hmm. There are, on the other hand, people who are introverts or who are agoraphobic, meaning they don't like being in public places, who are happy as a clam to be home all the time and dealing with people more remotely. So strangely enough, there's a subpopulation of people who are helped by it. This unfortunate woman in her 90s, would greatly benefit from being with her family or her family or something, even if it means a slightly higher risk of infection. It might be better for her, and that's a difficult decision that her family and her doctor would have to make.
Right.
But, to just be miserable at the end of your life, that's no solution. On the other hand, we're obviously trying to protect the vulnerable as well. I have a cousin who's in great health, who's just turned 100 a few days ago. Hats off to Myron back east. And he told me that he's at a senior living facility with his wife, who's 94, and they're both in pretty good health. So they couldn't have a birthday party like they would normally have for him. So everyone went out on their patio in this facility. It's a nice facility. People have more of like an apartment and then the general cafeteria and things. So they went out on their patios and everybody sort of sung to him from the patio. And that was his birthday celebration, in addition to Zoom festivities with relatives and phone calls from me and things like that. So people are having to make do, and it's sad and unfortunate. And at the same time, humans will do what they have to do, which is try to adapt and try to survive and try to make do with this and realize that however our circumstances are, at least we're not currently sick or in the hospital or on a ventilator or anything like that. And that gets us through another day. Our ancestors got through the pandemic of 1919, the Great Flu, Spanish flu. Probably wasn't from Spain. It may have been from France or maybe from the U.S., but they call it the Spanish flu.
Right.
And people have gotten through other horrific situations in wartime, and the Holocaust and all of these things. And so somehow we figure out a way to survive the best we can. And it's a day-by-day process. You know, a friend of mine who's quite smart said, this is feeling more like a marathon than a sprint. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about how you run a marathon, you don't go out there and blast the first mile. You kind of have to get your pace going. You know, you get a little rhythm going. You try to find a rhythm. And that's what I was talking about when I said get up in the morning and find something to do that is meaningful to you, and get a routine going, get a schedule going, get some exercise, get some meditation in if that's something that works for you. Because this is going to be a little more of a marathon. As you said before, it's probably not going to be a light switch going on and off in terms of the society opening up. Gavin Newsom, our governor of California, made a good comment. He said it's going to be a little bit more like a dimmer switch than a light switch, because we're going to be turning some things on, you know, maybe certain stores or certain work situations where we can distance ourselves, but at the same time go back to that type of environment. They'll figure it out step by step and see how the rate of infection changes as they do this. But we've got to be prepared for a marathon. We've got to pace ourselves. We know there's going to be ups and downs in this marathon. There's going to be some hills or something that we've got to climb over, like the Boston Marathon. Mm-hmm. But we can make it through, because we've made it through other things ourselves, and our ancestors have made it through worse. So
right.
Regardless of where you're from, somebody who was related to you made it through that Spanish flu in 1919, because if they didn't make it through, we wouldn't be talking to you. So
I have a photo of my grandfather in a German military uniform from, you know, those years. He was in World War I. You know, my mom was born in Germany. So
he was in Kaiser's army.
Yes, he was the Jew in Kaiser's army. Ten Hut. Yeah. Yes, he fortunately, you know, got through that. And people don't realize today how catastrophic that Spanish flu, that was the name of it, how catastrophic that was. I remember I read an article in, it was about my university, Berkeley, and it was in one of those alumni magazines, and it was an article about the Spanish flu, and it passed through the campus, and the mortality rate was on a different scale than what we're seeing now.
That flu hit younger people harder than older people, and so a lot of younger people died. In fact, more people under the age of 30 died from the Spanish flu in 1918-19 than died in World War I, which was a devastatingly awful war in terms of casualties, and yet more people died from that flu under the age of 30. And worldwide, I guess estimates have varied, but I've heard 50 million. I've heard other figures in terms of how many people died out of a smaller population than now. So the numbers were certainly dwarf anything that coronavirus is doing at this point. You know, the medical facilities obviously were more rudimentary. 100 years ago, the ventilators and iron lung had not been developed. I don't think oxygen therapy was even an option. So there were very limited options, unfortunately, when people got sick with influenza in 1919. It was more of, you know, cool compresses and sunshine, and just keep them eating and drinking if they can.
Right.
And then either you fought it off or you didn't.
Well, sunshine and the change in our weather, I don't know if there's any evidence either way about what effect that might have on this COVID-19 virus. You know, I mean, we know with flus, They tend to diminish with the arrival of spring, but I guess the jury's still out on that question. I'm not sure.
I agree with you. The jury is out. Most of the warm weather climates have not been hit as hard as the colder weather climates, but we still don't know what that actually means for our northern hemisphere spring and summer, or for the southern hemisphere, which will be going into winter when we go into summer.
Right.
So we don't know what the effect will be. I mean, there's just a lot of speculation, and we need more hard facts. We also have to institute things that, you know, there's a whole bunch of challenges to our freedom and our sense of privacy and all of that. Google and Apple are working on apps that could track us so that if you have the infection, they'll know who you might have been exposed to, so that they can notify those people anonymously. And
oh, wow.
We have to decide how much of our freedom we want to give up for our health and our physical well-being. It's a really big challenge in societies like ours that are used to a relatively high amount of freedom. It's not as big a challenge, obviously, in the Chinese Communist Party or some other authoritarian countries, but it's a lot of things that are challenging right now.
This is a scenario that I envision when the vaccine is out and distributed. You're going to have a chip on your driver's license that said you got the Co-19V, meaning the vaccine. Otherwise, you're not getting into this restaurant. Didn't they check for guns at the weapons at the ball games, at the security measures? You're going to have to show that you had that vaccine if you want to go into a restaurant, a club, a concert, a Laker game, whatever. It seems to me that is a for sure.
So that's very possible. That circles back to our talking about antibodies before, because the Germans are talking about using antibody tests and giving people a certificate of immunity and then letting them go back to work and riding the trains and things like that if they have that certificate, if they have that ID card that says you're, at least at this point, immune from the further infection. So you're absolutely bringing up some interesting issues here, both medically and socially.
Our society has been traumatized by this. Is this a punctuation mark in our history? Now, alternatively, I read this article today about for the animals, it's great. It's like, hey, where is everybody? Every bear is coming out of his hut in Yosemite going, there's nobody here. This is great. Squirrels, trout, the eagles, there's nobody here. What happened? If you're not human, this is like the greatest day you've ever had. If you're a fish out there, if you're a salmon who's used to seeing hooks every other place in the ocean and nets, guess what? It's what happened. Nobody's here. We're free. We're likely to see our natural populations beyond humanity really make a comeback. I can say this because I walk in the Hollywood Hills. I live below the Hollywood sign here, and there's a lake. It's like going back in time. I've seen things I've never seen before my whole life, and I grew up in L.A., namely parking spaces. It's just a totally new place. I think nature is getting a reprieve from the assault of humanity.
Well, the virus is definitely affecting the balance of nature. As you mentioned, animals coming out. I mean, there's some cities that are seeing more coyotes and possum and all of that tend to come into the cities when they have an opportunity. Another thing is that our air is a lot clearer.
Exactly.
Distinctly in LA. I mean, it's almost as if 60% of the cars went electric overnight because nobody's driving and there's no emissions to speak of. And so the air quality most days is good and some days is great.
Yeah.
And, we're appreciating that. We just, I also, here's another one. Did you hear about the seismic? There's people experts in earthquakes, and they say that they can listen. And usually on the weekends, the sounds around big cities get quieter because the trains don't run as often and trucks don't run and all of that. Well, it turns out that because we're lowering dramatically the number of vehicles, trains, all this sort of stuff, that the level of low-level seismic activity has been reduced in North America, and they can listen more quietly to little tiny earthquakes that happen. They never could listen to them before. So it's this little tiny virus that's led to this change in our society. The mitigation and the going home and the sheltering at home has had all these effects on nature, even seismic effect, air quality. It's really remarkable the number of changes that have occurred. And some of them we should appreciate.
Another thing, and I think for the public at large, it's time to, more respect for A students, because it's going to be the A students, those nerds who didn't want to play basketball or are home studying, that are going to save our ass through this eventually. So much of our society is hanging by threads. So this farm to table connection is a thread, and it's truckers. And before the truckers, it's farm workers and pickers and people that are kind of our invisibles in our society. But guess what? Our survival hangs upon those threads.
There's a lot of people to appreciate. I read recently that the meat workers, the people that cut meat into the small packages. Meat doesn't actually come in packages. It has to be put in the packages. It comes from an animal.
Yes.
So when the animal is slaughtered and the large pieces of meat are cut into smaller pieces of meat, they have to be packaged. And there's usually a conveyor belt with a large number of people very close together packaging that meat and cutting it and doing things they have to do to it. The problem is that that's a perfect environment to spread coronavirus to one another. Not really to us, because we don't believe it lives on the food. So the workers in these things have said, we're going to take off. We're not going to work in this environment unless you give us the proper protective equipment. So as you said, these are the invisibles. We don't think about the people who cut the chicken breast into pieces and cut the meat. Mm-hmm. But if you want to have a chicken breast next week or the week after, the guys have to cut it this week so it can be shipped on a refrigerated truck to your local grocery store. And so these are the invisibles that are so important to our society, just like these hopefully Nobel Prize winning scientists will be important when they come up with some treatments and cures. Everybody plays a role. Everybody who's playing a constructive role in our society is important to us. And we're really realizing all the pieces and how the pieces could potentially fall apart and things could go bad. So, I think that we're holding together, and a lot of people working hard, and those who aren't working are willing to work hard if they're asked back. Mm-hmm. But everybody needs to be appreciated. You're right.
We've lived in a period of history. So, I grew up in the 60s. So I was a little boy, whatever. There's never been a moment in my life where I've walked into a supermarket and the shelves were not stocked amply. I've never experienced scarcity. I've never experienced, I experienced war, but guess what? It was on television in Vietnam or in Iraq. I've never seen devastation in my backyard. We've lived with science progressing and inconveniences coming at us every 5 years, whether it's the flip phone to the iPhone to this and that. We've lived in this period of unimpeded progress, at least in America, and we're not used to hiccups or bumps or the calamities and scarcities, things that really have pounded humanity across the millennia. The little speck of time that we've lived in has been a period of unprecedented wealth and plenty and an expanding economy since World War II that's almost never happened in human history. This is the first real smack in the mouth we as a society have had in my memory.
It's a big smack, and it also, we took for granted that you could go on a cruise ship and it would be safe. We took for granted that you could fly to China and take a tour and see the Great Wall, and you could travel to all these exotic places. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to take a while for us to be comfortable again with doing a lot of the things that we felt like was our expectation or our
right.
Our right. Our right was to go anywhere we wanted to. You retire and you're going to travel to Italy. You're going to travel to Spain. Right now, nobody's going those places. It's like, and won't want to go there in a year, maybe in 5 years. But I don't know how long it'll take for people to reacclimate, even when the virus seems to be hopefully subsiding. Yeah, vaccination will help that and things, but that could be 12 to 18 months off, or it could take a little longer. Globalization, we also took for granted that you could order something on Amazon that came from Guangdong province or Wuhan city or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to sort of know where we're ordering things from, because maybe I'd feel more comfortable with something coming from Chicago than something coming from China right now. So there's things that we really did take for granted. There was a tremendous prosperity, a tremendous freedom, and yet we are biological creatures on planet Earth, and we don't know everything. And a little tiny virus comes along, microscopic, and can do a lot of damage at so many different levels. Psychologically as well as physically as well as politically. And so you're right that this is a shock to the system. It's a different kind of shock than 9/11 was. Mm-hmm. And it's a generational shock that is affecting people, obviously the college generation, high school generation. One of my sons is a senior in high school, and he's kind of like, this was his senior year. It's kind of on hold, and there probably won't be a graduation. There probably won't be a prom. So it's, look, he's healthy, and we're all doing okay. So that's the most important thing. But it's a generational shock, and people will be writing books and poems and movies and other things about this as we get through it. And we'll have to work our way through it over a period of years to understand it. And right now, as I said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So we just got to work on it day by day, week by week, get through it, get something out of the positives, and maybe grow a little bit as people and appreciate some of the things we talked about, including the people we don't typically think about as much that are important. Yeah. And that's the way it goes.
Yeah. So your book, for people that want to get it, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people about Think Away Your Pain and the Mind-Body Workbook, because there's a lot of people, I would imagine that there's some people with some back pain and IBS, which is, what is that, irritating boyfriend syndrome? I forget, but my girlfriend had it. I think that's what it was called. Where can people? A good one. Thank you. You can use it, by the way. Where can people find this book? Because I found it really helpful for me. I have had my challenges in that area. and getting a handle on that was meaningful, and creating a conscious discipline to our subconscious behavior. Basically, we're trying to do things within the realm of our consciousness that will reflect back into our subconsciousness that has a handle on these kind of issues like back pain, abdominals, the whole thing.
So I mean, the basic premise is that your emotions affect your physical health. Anyone who's ever blushed understands that. Anyone who's ever had a nervous stomach before a test or before a performance understands that our emotions affect different bodily functions. And it turns out that a lot of people with chronic pain, the emotions are a key factor in stress, and the nervous system and adrenaline are key factors in perpetuating the pain cycle. And I have a program that includes journaling, writing about your feelings, expressing your feelings, understanding the connection that can dissolve and break these neural pathways that have gotten stuck. And the program's discussed and detailed in Think Away Your Pain, and the Mind Body Workbook is the 30-day guided journal. They're both available on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble and iTunes, and Kindle,
I have it.
All of that sort of stuff. So there's lots of different ways you can get it. It's also an Audible book. So for those of you who like to listen to books, it's on Audible, which I think is owned by Amazon now. I think everything's owned by Amazon. But anyway, Audible is available as well. So you might find this an interesting read or listen during this period of time where you're very aware of how your emotions are affecting you day to day, but you may not be aware of how they're affecting you month to month or year to year. And so this kind of gets into that. So
it breaks a cycle, that a lot of people are locked in. And that really takes us back to that really huge figure in human and philosophical and medical and Jewish history. That's Maimonides, whose mantra was, and you can say it.
I'll let you say it.
Treat the person, not the disease. And
exactly.
That's the base.
I use that in my sign off. I didn't want to on my signature sign off on my email, but I didn't want to
it's in your
break your break your rhythm. I use it in my book too.
Yes, in your book.
I use it in my book as well.
And I'll say this, a couple of trivia facts. I was in Fez, Morocco last summer, speaking of travel, and I went into the Mela, which was the old ancient Jewish district in the walled Medina of Fez, and there was Maimonides' home. There it is. It was, and there was the little synagogue that he went to. He was originally born in Spain and then migrated to what is today Morocco and lived in the ancient city of Fes and attended Al-Qarawiyyin University, where he was he lettered in 3 sports. I forget. he was, and then he went to Egypt. But he was what they call a polymath. By that I mean he was a lawyer, a physician, a philosopher, and responsible for interpreting the holiest of Jewish literature, which is the Torah. So you could have a multi-major. You could major in more than one discipline, apparently, in those days. And
he was a physician to kings too. To kings,
right,
and,
in Egypt. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And
so he was a highly regarded physician, as you said, philosopher, rabbi, all of that, doctor. I don't attempt to do quite those many things, but I do think that his philosophy of integrating spirit and mind and philosophy with the body and health and all of that is really the key. And then one of the things that modern medicine has drifted away from it because of our success at reducing things to a very simple chemical constituent or treatment. But human beings are more complicated than just their collections of bones, joints, and chemicals. And so we have to have both the microscopic reductionistic viewpoint, and we have to also have the macroscopic, larger holistic viewpoint, I think, to successfully deal with health problems, including chronic pain, and including keeping your immune system strong so you can hopefully withstand this coronavirus if it comes around your way. And eating well, getting exercise, staying calm, meditating, all of these things can help you to keep your immune system strong. Tremendous amount of science supporting the mind-body approach to health and to chronic pain and all of that.
Right. It's not just like, hey, are you spiritual? Yeah, I got a few candles. Yeah, I'm spiritual. It's something, it's deeper than that. Now, I just wanted to say this before I get off. You went to Princeton, and I know you were a sports fan. My uncle went to Princeton, Uncle Don, and he played football there with the last Ivy League Heisman Trophy winner. He was on the same team with
Dick Kazmaier.
Bingo. He was the center. My uncle was the center for Dick Kazmaier's Princeton Tiger football team. My uncle died, I don't know how many years ago. And just prior to his death, Dick Kazmaier, who won a Heisman Trophy at Princeton, passed away. And 2 weeks later, my uncle kicked the bucket. And we were at the funeral, and they said, well, why did this happen? I go, why did it happen? Kazmaier needed a center. He goes, where's Cone? I need my blocker. I'm not playing up here without Cone. And boom, my uncle kicked right there. Next thing you knew, he was upstairs blocking for Kazmaier again. So that's my story. I love that.
That's a great Princeton story.
Yeah, it is. Well, Dr. David Schechter, I want to thank you for really just a great conversation, really fun. I hope we can do it again. And I look forward to being in your office under happier and less stressful times. Are you going to your office? Are you seeing patients? What is the protocol now for you?
I'm seeing a small number of patients every week, face to mask or face to face or mask to mask. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing a lot of telemedicine, so the audio video chats where we can identify and deal with a lot of issues that way.
I still haven't seen a mask in a store other than the homemade ones. I happen to have a rated one because I used it to repair surfboards and I had it. But is it hard to get these supplies?
I was fortunate in that I'm one of these guys who orders in advance, so I had some protective equipment in the closet that's come in handy. I was also working on a woodworking project, so I had bought some N95 masks for that.
Okay.
That was which I repurposed, obviously, to medical. They're equivalently effective, but getting more is quite challenging. So I've got to kind of ration what I have. Obviously, the frontline people in the emergency rooms need it a lot more than I do, but I'm trying to be safe and just, ration out what I have. And patients are coming to the office with masks, so that's saving us some masks. And of course, I have one that I wear when I'm near patients at this point.
Right.
But we're doing the best we can, and we, hopefully more things will go into production, and we'll have more supplies soon.
Well, the main thing is that you're safe, and I have so much respect for you, not only as a person and as a friend, but as a physician. You've helped me over the years through my various challenges, and I am grateful. At the tender age of 64, and by the way, I've never been this old. I've never been as old as I am right now. It's amazing.
That's truly amazing. It's
yeah,
really amazing.
I'm as old as I've ever been, and I'm as young as I'll ever be at the same time. Who knew? So,
and Bill, thank you for mentioning my website, by the way, SchechterMD.com and MindBodyMedicine.com.
Okay.
Both of them
let's get that.
Are useful to your audience.
Repeat that again.
My office website, SchechterMD, SchechterMD.com. He'll probably link that on his podcast. And then MindBodyMedicine.com, where I talk about that mind-body approach to chronic pain and other disorders.
Hey, thank you so much. Keep up your great work and stay safe. And if there's some other information you want to share or get out there, amplify as it becomes available, let me know and we'll get it out there, in the small way that I can do that.
Sounds good. Thanks a lot, Bill. I enjoyed it.
All right, likewise, Doc. I'll catch up to you later. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care. So there you have it, folks. That was Dr. David Schechter breaking it down virus-wise, spirituality-wise, mind-body-wise, and otherwise, and hopefully that'll offer a more optimistic window of the future as we move through this. And till next time, folks, namaste, shalom, and aloha. Namasaloha.